channel. Thank you. Oh, Kevin, you might still be muted.
You just hit that. Sorry about that. I won't keep you long. We'll go to Q&A as soon as we can, but just to explain, I've been in business for 30 years prior to entering Parliament, so and grew quite a very small business into a national business, and been through 3 recessions. So I very much sympathise, empathise, whatever you want to say, with many of the people you got on your call. And I think it's great the work that your network does. As part of the work I did prior to entering Parliament, I was part of a mentoring organisation called Yorkshire Connect, which basically connected people who'd run successful businesses, built successful businesses, with people who are startups. So I think this kind of learning is absolutely critical to business success. I mean, as Heather, as you probably understand, most of our work on the APPG, the All Party Group, focuses on access to finance, which is absolutely fundamental for any business. You cannot grow a business without finance. Now, not everyone wants to grow a business quickly, and people are quite happy, many people want to run a lifestyle business or a business where they can just earn a decent income. But key to the opportunities that business brings are businesses that want to scale up. And it's also key to the UK economy, of course. So this is absolutely fundamental. 60% of the private sector workforce in this country works for SMEs. So hugely important. 99% of all businesses are SMEs. So access to finance for those SMEs is critically important. We recently wrote a report called Level Up to Scale Up, which is how we improve access to finance, because there is a gap in the market, a big gap in the market. Mark Carney identified it as something around 20 billion annual gap in the SME finance market. So, and part of the problem as well is the appetite amongst businesses in terms of borrowing, because there's not a lot of trust between businesses and banks. So that's one of the things we try and improve, the relationship between business and banks, and we try to level the playing field between banks and businesses. Banks generally are so huge these days that if you have a dispute with them, you're pretty much on your own, and you're facing the huge power and resources of big banks. Lloyds Bank, for example, have a £1 billion per annum budget for legal advice. So it's really difficult as SMEs to get justice in those situations. And I think the thing we see, I was told by my dad, who was also a businessman when I was kind of quite young and I was just growing up, and he was encouraging me and my brother and sisters to go into business. And he said, he gave the old adage, banks, they lend you an umbrella when the sun's shining, they take it away again when it starts to rain. And that kind of that feeling on which businesses have, and there is our research we did, and through this Level Up to Scale Up report we did, pretty much endorsed that view. There are some really difficult times businesses face because banks hit the commercial organisations and they hit trouble at the same time often that businesses hit trouble, which is through recessions. And last year's a good example. If there hadn't been the government support for those loan programs, I think lots of businesses would have gone out of business because they wouldn't have had access to finance, because the banks don't want to lend when the world's risky. So this is what we're trying to do. We try and improve access to finance, and we try and improve dispute resolution when things go wrong. A couple of stats I want to just throw at you that kind of articulate the picture, I think, is 73% of UK businesses in the survey, this is the Federation of Small Businesses, for small business, 73% of UK SMEs would rather grow more slowly than borrow. And that's a combination of factors. But one of the factors certainly is, we think, is the lack of trust, that people don't want to take the risk of borrowing in case the plug is pulled. And at that point in time, you've got nowhere to go other than probably into administration, which isn't always a fair process either. The other key stat is, in lots of other countries, they have something called mutual banks, which are not for profit. So they reinvest profits in the productive economy, including providing more loans to SMEs and providing more financial inclusion to personal customers. And what we identified in the course of our work is, during the post-recession period, 2008 to 2013, SME lending in the UK reduced by 25% by our big commercial banks. SME lending from the big regional mutual banks in Germany, big and small regional mutual banks, increased by 20% over that period. So that was when you needed the umbrella. It was raining like mad and you needed the umbrella. And those lots of good businesses could have got through that recession in the UK had they been given the support of their banks. So there's lots of stats show this is a problem for us in the UK. As a young backbencher who entered Parliament the same time as I did, in 2016 wrote in a report, the guy was called Rishi Sunak, and he wrote in a report that the UK is number 1 in a survey of OECD countries in terms of startups, but number 13 out of 14 when it comes to scale-ups. That's the number of businesses that have reached 10 employees within 3 years. There is some fundamental problem if we're in that situation. So we've recommended a number of solutions and we keep banging on about it and we're making progress, I think. One of them being we should develop a tranche, a raft of regional mutual banks around the country, the Yorkshire Regional Mutual Bank, the South West Regional Mutual Bank. We've got lots of people who want to set these banks up, not for profit. I say they have much more of a relationship between business and banks. Small banks tend to lend to small businesses and we don't have small banks in the UK. So one of these really things we want to push is these new initiative of regional mutual banks, which should mean that SMEs have that relationship again. They're more likely to be able to borrow. The banks themselves are more likely to have a relationship with that business and see them through the tough times, but also help them grow in the good times. So that's one of the many things we do. We also work very hard on dispute resolution. So we've managed to help expand the remit of the financial ombudsman service now. So businesses with a turnover up to £6.5 million now get free dispute resolution through the financial ombudsman service on a basis of what was fair and reasonable, which wasn't the case before. The limit was 1.8 million. So more and more we're getting some justice, that fair and level playing field between businesses and banks. We've got lots of work to do, but we think the world is a fairer place than it was, but still lots of things we can do. But we're now going to conclude and listen to what you were going to ask us and how we can help your businesses start, scale up, grow, thrive, and all the opportunities that come with it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kevin. Some amazing stats there, which I've scribbled down, and we'll definitely be sharing this with the rest of our network, because, as you say, there's still a lot of cause to be optimistic despite the hardship that everybody's facing currently. For the Q&A, because we're a relatively small group today, I think if people are comfortable to come off mute and use the raise hand function, and I'll try and steer our guest speakers towards you so that you can ask your question. But in the meantime, if you'd prefer to drop a question into the chat and have me read it out, that's also fine. Would anybody like to go first? Graham, go for it.
Hi, sorry, unfortunately I've got to go at 25 past for another meeting, so that's why I've got my hand up early.
Get in there quick, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Chief Executive of the Let's Do Business Group, and we're, among other things, we're a community development finance institution, a CDFI, based in Hastings, cover the southeast and east of England. In the budget, the Chancellor announced additional funding to go to the Midlands Engine, Northern Powerhouse and South West. And yet, in terms of the levelling up agenda, although the South East is perceived as being rich, as you know, it's got pockets of fairly severe deprivation, particularly along the coastal strips of East Sussex, Kent, Essex, Norfolk and Suffolk. And we've had a very successful 18 months lending under the recovery loan scheme. And we've lent, and C-bills before that, and we've lent around 4 million to businesses across our patch. But if we had access to further funds, we could do more, because we can only invest what we've got, and clearly we can only generate leads and interest, have sufficient capital. So I wonder, what the chances are, whether there's an opportunity to look at a fund for, southeast, east of England, even if it is just limited to those coastal areas.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I mean, we're a big believer in CDFIs as well. We see those almost in the same category as regional mutuals. So great work that you do there. And again, some great examples of how you managed to get finance out to businesses that the big banks wouldn't touch. So really excellent work you're doing. I mean, obviously you can get funds through other sources as well. Big Society Capital, Fair Finance for All, I think, as support CDFIs. The quantum generally, obviously there is a political imperative at the moment about certain parts of the country, and but the quantum generally, we agree, needs increasing. One thing that's going through Parliament at the moment is the Dormant Assets Bill. Dormant Assets provides lots of the funding for the people who distribute the money, Big Society Capital and others, but we're increasing the scope of dormant assets to bring another 800 million into their coffers, which they can then on distribute. So that doesn't all go to CDFIs, but nevertheless there will be a lot more money to distribute, which hopefully will mean the South East will get some of that as well. And I entirely agree with you. It has been debated often in Parliament. You know, levelling up isn't just about regions. It's sometimes about pockets of deprivation. It's about certain genders. It's about ethnic minorities. It's all those kind of things that we need to level up as well. So, if you make your case for it, I would guess Big Society Capital and Fair Finance for All would be keen to listen to you, because CDFIs are certainly in their sights, and they've supported them a lot in the past.
Thank you, Kevin. Graham, was there anything else you wanted to add? Did that cover your question?
No, I mean that's very helpful, and you know we're always looking at different opportunities. The benefit that we've had is where we've used our own bankers, which is Unity Trust Bank, to lead, particularly with CBILS and now the Recovery Loan Scheme. And you know, I think it's not just thinking about the short term; it's the longer term as well into investment into the CDFI network. And I know that you're very aware of the sort of value of the network nationally, and the good work that colleagues are doing in the north of England and in the southwest. So unfortunate that the southeast and east of England tends to get thrown in with London, Cambridge, etc. And I think that myth needs dispelling, which is why which I will now get off.
Thank you.
I mean, just another point on that as well is, Unity Trust Bank, of course, are also funded by Big Society Capital, so that there's a flow through of money through them into you, which sounds good. One thing that we think the government got wrong last year, and the Bank of England got wrong in the teeth of the crisis, was all the money that was distributed through the banks. The Term Funding Scheme for SMEs, which is very cheap money, was only provided to banks, fully fledged banks, and not to other lenders, non-bank lenders, and the commercial non-bank lenders, and I guess CDFIs as well. So that's in the future, when if these things happen again, and God forbid we have another pandemic, but we think there'll be similar need for these kind of schemes for things like decarbonisation, for example. That's part of the work Heather's been doing on Bankers Net Zero. We want to make sure that all lenders get access to that cheap money that they can on-lend, and that should apply to other sectors like CDFIs for us.
Kevin, you've created a beautiful segue there into the next question, which is going to come from a sustainability consultant, Maddie from Birmingham.
Hi, good introduction there, I like that. So really, my question is, what we're noticing at the moment is a shift in kind of the conversation around sustainability. It's no longer about why should we become a sustainable business, but it's now more about how do we actually do this in practice. So I work with SMEs across Birmingham and Greater Birmingham, and we're actually putting on a course at the moment which is focusing on upskilling business leaders, entrepreneurs, etc. in sustainability. We were actually able to get this course funded, but what we're thinking, we thought we were going to have 25 businesses sign up, but we've had 150 businesses join us now, and the capacity for us to provide that support is limited because we've only got the funding to provide this round. So what my kind of question is on that front is, what's the finance looking like in terms of the upskilling sector within sustainability, and making sure that all business leaders, all business employees, etc., have the capacity to understand sustainability from a practical and knowledge-based sense, and how funding bodies are going to look to provide training or outsource training to businesses like ourselves.
Yeah, good point. I think it's probably one for Heather. I've got lots of views on that, but Heather's got plenty too. So you're muted. You're not loud.
Sorry. 2 years on, we still haven't quite figured that one out, have we?
Mm.
I know. I think one of the biggest questions that we've got is how SMEs can kind of get access to that information and what that information is. I mean, unfortunately, I was having a conversation earlier today, and we're so in the foothills of this. We still don't even have an agreed kind of standard of what data looks like that we're supposed to build on. So we're, even when you're kind of going to different consultancies or whatnot, it's almost impossible to compare apples with apples. It's more like kind of I like to say a tropical fruit salad in terms of the choice rather than and I think one of the things that we're going to be working quite closely with the FSB and the IOD and others and government on is saying, well, let's get ourselves to the starting point where everybody knows what they're supposed to be measuring and what they need to know, because we're almost at this stage now where people don't, the kind of Donald Rumsfeld said, you don't know what you don't know yet. And so getting to the point where businesses have enough information to even understand what their starting point is has got to be the first step. And unfortunately, whilst there's a lot of disparate information out there, there's no agreed consensus on what the starting block is. And I think that's probably our biggest challenge. Once we get to that stage, then we can build from that quite nicely. But it's definitely a challenge. And how do we reach SMEs as well?
Absolutely. I mean, the key thing for us is making sure what banks not very good at is they tend to go from one extreme to the other. And so you can see what's happening in boardrooms now. They're all saying, oh my God, we need to our ESG credentials, our CSR credentials, all those kind of things. And they're getting pressure from their shareholders, of course, to be greener, and not just their own businesses, but their supply chain and their customer base. So we can see, and we're very concerned, that they'll come along to some businesses that actually you're a brown business, not a green business. You might be perfectly working within the government regulations. You probably are. And they say, we don't want you anymore. Thanks very much. Or your rates are going to go up by X amount. And that which will be hugely detrimental to the task of decarbonising. It's great to hear how many people you've got that are willing to go on this journey, Maddie. And absolutely, but they'll need finance to do it. We don't want the banks pulling the plug. We want them to support them through that transition. That's the key to it.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm going to invite Patricia Marks from Somerset just to follow up on that, because her question, I think, relates to this about who SMEs can actually talk to about this. Where should the pressure be applied?
Yeah, my question is can you and will you apply pressure to any of the banks, whether it be the high street ones that we're all saying that don't lend to SMEs, is to actually give them somebody to talk to? Because that's the problem at the moment. We're dealing with a client with quite a substantial banking issue at the moment, and it is one of the challenger banks, but there's no one to talk to. It's all online platforms, and you can't quite get across the challenge that you're facing if you're doing it through, in effect, text type speak, because you're trying to speak as fast as you can by typing it all in. And if it's not the banks themselves, I think Alex mentioned it at the beginning, it's organizations like us, we're well versed in talking to SMEs and talking to them into their language. And somewhere needs to be that crossover where they've got real live people to talk to about the issues that they're facing, because half of the time we don't know what we don't know, we don't know. So we don't even know there's a question to ask until you sit around in a situation where you're having a chat to people and you suddenly think, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that one. How is that going to, where can the pressure be applied? I mean, we all know personal banking. I mean, I can't get to talk to anyone about my bank account. Drives me insane. But to do it with my business is a bit more severe because I've got not just my mortgage to worry about, I've got my staff's mortgage to worry about. I need the ability to access someone.
It's so true. I mean, this is why we like regional mutual banks, because they are proper relationship banking. Handles banking, very good example of a proper relationship lender who actually you can pick the phone and speak to somebody. It's not, as you say, at the moment, we've got a combination of huge banks, which are all told what to do by boards of directors and then credit committees, and the relationship manager has limited discretion. Or tech, as you say, tech platforms who are built with low cost, not basically, so they don't have to speak. It's cheaper if they don't have to speak to customers. So that's why we think we want this new kind of tranche of banks, regional mutuals. We don't think it's any coincidence. The UK is an outlier in this area. All G7 countries, apart from the UK, has this key element, regional mutual banks. And in Germany, famously, they're hugely reliant on those. And that's why they have these intergenerational businesses, because father passes to son or mother passes to daughter, whatever, and on it goes, because they do feel that banks will support them through the crises that are bound to occur in the economic cycles. So, and part of that is exactly what you say, which is the relationship-based nature of the banking, of how banking should be. So 100% agree with you. But to do that for us, it'll have to be around, hopefully, new competition. So Metro Bank and Handels Bank and people like that, but also this not-for-profit sector, which we are starting to get traction with Treasury, number 10, other area, business ministers. I asked a question on it today in the House. So we're getting gradual support for it, but it's been like pulling teeth, which has been a bit frustrating.
And this is probably some place as well where it's really helpful to have voices like the National Enterprise Network and others saying, because sometimes a lot of what we get is, that's not the way people are going. That's kind of romantic and old school. Everybody wants to be at the coal face, and it's all about technology now. So having business voices kind of speaking out as well and saying to governments and their parliamentarians that that they value relationships within the finance sector is an important element, because you'd be surprised the number of times we've been brushed aside saying that we're being romantic about the needs of businesses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Patricia. Yeah, I think the role of the National Enterprise Network for its members is absolutely to be the voice of enterprise support providers who are themselves representing the small business communities that they're helping. So I think I could speak on behalf of NEN and say, anytime you need more sound bites, more evidence, more data from, on the ground, feel free to come and speak to us.
Very useful, thank you.
Saffron, would you like to raise your question next?
Yes, thank you. Regional mutual banks sounds very interesting and something I don't know much about. I do, however, know a little bit about community wealth building and circular economies. And I just wondered, Kevin, if you had, how does a regional mutual bank get started? And do these things run in correlation? And perhaps you know about the Preston project where they've made that work. Because I'm part of the steering group on something trying to do the same in southwest London, which listening to Graham talking about the problems of being in the southeast and having the economic issues of being in Hastings, we are in Croydon, which has detrimental problems, but it is part of South London and very close to southwest London, where people are struggling. It's very expensive to live in the area. So in order to stay in the area, when people have the children leave home, they can't afford to buy a home near their parents. They're having to move further out. So there is a problem living in a local area. And could regional mutual banks support community wealth building?
Yeah, you're just fading out a little bit in parts. And you said right at the start you didn't know about regional mutual banks, but you did know about something else.
community wealth building.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I just wondered
okay.
if the two things run in correlation, and how does
Yeah.
a regional mutual bank get started?
Okay, it's a really good question. And there's about probably half a dozen now are getting somewhere. There's one in Wales. The Welsh Government's agreed to support one there. There's one called the South West Mutual, which is run by Tony Greenham, former banker. Most of the people leading these are former bankers who think this is a good idea, and this is about community banking. Jules Peck, who's the Avon one. We've got a guy called Stephen Ward, who's the Yorkshire one. So you need a champion for it. Ideally, somebody who has that kind of social purpose, focus in terms of where they want to contribute, and ideally some banking experience. And then you set up, I mean, we can connect you with the Regional Mutual Banks Association, I think it's called, Mutual Banks Association it's called, and to help you, put you, direct you on the right fashion. We'd love, I mean, we think there's a fantastic opportunity for a London regional mutual bank, for example. So I would probably work, I don't know what your political views are, but those things don't bother me, but I'd probably go to the mayor and speak to City Khan and say, you know, this is a great initiative. We're working with Andy Street, for example, over his office in West Midlands, and so the Yorkshire leaders and others. So you need some champions, and it can absolutely be yourself. But like anything else in life, you've got to get a compelling case. We think we've built one for the regional mutuals. You've got to get a coalition of people there, people around it who believe in it. So your business networks, your political support, your MP, your your mayor, all that kind of stuff, and then go down. Obviously, raising money is the principal issue. It takes in total probably about 30 million to start up a regional mutual bank, but you do that in phases. Of course, you probably raise a few 100,000 in terms of seed capital to put the business plan together. Then you a few million to get the actual bank up and running in terms of its logistics, its compliance, all that kind of stuff, and then the rest of it is just capitalising the bank so it can lend money. So, but it's getting to be a fairly well-trodden path. So we can definitely connect you. Who's with the APPG, who supports the APPG, she could definitely provide the network information in terms of regional to the Mutual Banking Association to help you get started.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, Saffron, we've got Eva's contact details, so I can share those with you afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Next person with their hand up, Phil from Enterprise Exchange.
Thank you very much, Amy. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Phil, co-founder of Enterprise Exchange. We specialise in helping start-up businesses for people with additional barriers. So we do a lot of stuff in criminal justice, in welfare to work across the country. Just a couple of questions. One is around the finance bit. We obviously work with a lot of people who have really, really poor credit histories. So access to finance is just zero. Yeah, so however good their business plan is or the support that they're getting, they're on a bit of a non-starter, or we have to do it in a different way. So I was just going to ask, is there anything the government are thinking about is to widen, make it more inclusive in terms of finance for the people who have those additional barriers? And the second question was just a point that you made quite early on is I think the government recognises support for scale-ups is absolutely key. Totally get that. But what we're seeing is that a lot of people are starting businesses not to grow for lots of different reasons. And there's a huge cohort of people who are almost self-dwarfing. They don't want to grow. They do it for lifestyle businesses. They might do it as part of a portfolio career. And there seems to be a bit of a lack of support for that cohort, even though they're increasing wealth economically and in their communities as well. So I just wondered if there was any thoughts on those.
Okay, access to finance, as I said, critical. I presume you're in touch with things like a startup loans company, which is a really important part of this conversation.
Even I'm talking to people who come out of prison whose credit histories are absolutely smashed.
Well, I think it's a really interesting point. I think we should push a political message down that route, actually, that we should perhaps allocate a campaign to allocate a tranche of that money to people, like you say, people who are financially excluded or have some kind of other kind of life problem. Is maybe something we can work with the Ministry of Justice on, actually. It's a good idea.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Okay, so we're very happy to pick that with you after. Again, Eva, if you get in touch with Eva, we can can work with you on that. It's really, really interesting, and I think your organisation would be great. I mean, the other thing I would say is, and you probably tried all this stuff, but you do get a lot of people, very benevolent people, who are keen to help people that have had some tough breaks in life. So most of the businesses I've set up in my life, and I've set up quite a few, has been either credit card or back of a fag packet, but really a bit of cash you managed to get from somebody. And so, it wouldn't surprise me if you could get local people who are those benevolent kind of people, as altruists, to say, okay, these people want a chance, let's stick some cash in. Some of the people involved in the regional angels programs you'll have, for example, angel investors might put a fund together like that. That would be worth exploring. You might have done that already. But certainly, again, we can put you in touch with the regional angels programs. You might
that would be fantastic, and I think we have done a bit of that. And some of the organisations that we contract to do give small grants.
Yeah,
really, really beneficial. But I think it's that lack of consistency across the piece, that relying on benevolent people in certain areas, etc. It's not really a long-term solution. But I'd be really happy to pick up with that.
Yeah, I don't know though, because I mean, look at something called the Grameen Bank. This is something that was started, I think, in Bangladesh or Pakistan by a chap who basically this is what he did. He got money off lots of different people, and he made very small loans to people in those kind of circumstances, or just, women in remote villages in Bangladesh or whatever, and gave them money to buy a goat or whatever she did, and, whatever they did, or a sewing machine or something. And really successful. The payback was fantastic, and it really transformed things. So I think it is potentially sustainable because the money comes back in. Yeah. But I agree, it must be scalable. It must be like scale to make a meaningful difference. I can't remember your second question. What was the second question?
Yeah, all it was that there's a big cohort of enterprises that don't want to grow and scale up.
Okay.
And the scale up side get good support, and I think we're all in favour of that. But this big cohort seems to get a little bit neglected.
Well, I'll be a bit controversial because sometimes I am. I think you've got to be. There's only one thing worse. There's no business advice, and that's bad business advice.
Agreed.
So I have none rather than rubbish. So some of the old organisations, I'm really sorry if anybody here used to work for Business Link, but I think Business Link was terrible. People didn't know what they were talking about. So really the best people you can speak to are in these networking organisations. People who have started and run businesses, they're the people who should give advice. It shouldn't be teachers in schools, or it shouldn't be people who opine on this or theorise on it. It should be just connect with these kind of organisations, and usually around the country there are loads of them. I mean, the one I was a member of in Yorkshire, the Yorkshire Connect, it was 200 or 300 quid a year. It wasn't a lot at the time, but it was worth its weight in gold. And they would support businesses who are, like you say, one-man bands, one-woman bands, or ones that wanted to rule the world. It didn't make any difference. All that, the different levels of advice you get, they suited all comers. So that would be my advice to any small business: get into a good networking organisation with people who know what they're talking about.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'd just add one comment to that, if I may, which is that there is another side to that there are entrepreneurs who don't know what they're talking about as well.
Can happen.
So it is one of the reasons we exist is because there's lots of bad advice out there from people who are in business. So it's quite important that is put in context. By all means, go and network, but look carefully at what you're told and don't take one person's word. And if you can find a business advisor who knows what they're talking about, the NEN has an awful lot of them, then please come along and talk to us. That's what we're there for.
I totally agree with that. Yes, unless you have somebody you really, 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 really trust, then take a kind of a range of advice from different people, different stakeholders. Totally agree.
Brilliant. Okay, Kevin, I'm going to hand over to Alex, our chairman now. I think he's got a question for you.
It's a sort of question and a statement, Kevin, and good to see you again. So hope all's well.
Yes, you do, Alex, yeah.
It's really interesting about your 73% statistic, which you said about some of them will be prepared to grow slower and taking on additional finance. Some of the discussions we've been having with Rich Business Bank and Bays and DWP is around some of those small businesses which were affected as a result of COVID, those on universal credits, those looking at the NEA, and now the closure of the NEA and those little support packages which were available. And we're seeing some significant drift. And I think one of the phrases that Carol and I heard when we were talking to the British Business Bank was, our Venn diagram doesn't appear to be overlapping. We may have missed something. And it's very much on Phil's point around how are we supporting those who may be in a disadvantaged state at the moment, who are able to progress further forward. And one of the discussions which we had was around credit unions and looking at how they would be brought into the mix, and then also looking, as you say, around the mutual banks. And for me, it's about looking at those different tertiary levels of where people can access finance and where that journey is, and how we actually communicate that, because we're seeing a whole wealth of different people coming forward, some which are high growth, which can access fund from angels, etc., etc., and then those which are just saying, we know where we're trying to get to, there's an opportunity, but how on earth do we navigate our way through this at the moment? Can we have some of those pointers and directions? And I think that's the piece which is missing for me, is where those pointers and directions are, which is why this dialogue's fantastic, so we can actually get stuff back in there. So what are your thoughts around that as to the stages of approach for a business depending upon where they are at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's back to Patricia's question earlier, isn't it? You know, one common factor, lots of different type of actors within the whole SME finance space right now, but one common factor, you can't really talk to anybody, you know, almost without exception. So and part of that role, you know, I wouldn't rely, just talking about that point earlier, rely on one source of advice. I certainly wouldn't just rely on my bank manager for source of advice, but nevertheless, they can be useful, especially the right kind of bank manager. So the more we get money into CDFIs, which can play that role, of course, as we were saying earlier, the more we establish these regional mutual banks, the more we have the likes of Handelsbanken, and the more that SMEs, I guess, choose different banks than the big banks, you know, and that's one problem we've identified in our report. And please do have a look at it. But it identifies signposting as a big issue. Most people, when they're looking for finance, just don't know. You just go to the obvious. You go to HSBC, you go to Barclays, or whatever else. Well, we want people to actually look around and think, well, this is a better idea for me. So a lot of that is conversations like this, organisations like yours, the work we do, the work FSB, lots of other people do in terms of making sure people understand their choice. There is something called the banking referral scheme, which is what's supposed to happen. You go to your bank, they say no, and it's supposed to go into like a kind of some kind of hopper, where then that lead is then sent to lots of different banks. It doesn't work very well at the moment. The banks don't tend to send it on. They tend to just say, no, you're not. Rather than rejecting it, they say, no, you're not suitable for us, and never goes into fully fledged application. So we need to improve that as well. Ideally, that's laid right at the top. Ideally, you'd put your finance requirements in right as hopper at the top before you even speak to a bank, and they say, well, here's your 4 options. And one of them is a community development financial institution, one's a regional mutual, whatever. So you're better signposting, and and as well as obviously things like startup company, lots of different things which provide business advice as well, of course, don't they? So help with business plans. So more choice, better signposting, more information. And, as I said before, I think your network, your organisation is one of many that is vital to this whole conversation.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to come back to Patricia, who's got her hand up, but just to let everybody know that Eva has very helpfully put a link to the report that Kevin mentioned in the chat. Patricia.
My comment was, Kevin, I absolutely take on your point about Business Link, because it was a choice of, sometimes you could get a really good advisor, but not always. But just if you have the opportunity, can you then nudge whoever decided that Help to Grow should be delivered by academics at universities? I'm working on the program, and the mentoring and the networking, they're loving. What they're not enjoying, all the SME leads that I speak to, is the way that the material is delivered by academics, because it's so theory based. Right. It doesn't relate to them at all. Right. And the bit that they've enjoyed most out of it is they've built their own little network out of their cohort that have gone to the session. So that's one good win out of it. And they've met a mentor that is a business based person. but
Okay.
they are really struggling with the
Okay.
academia. So
That's
I absolutely
interesting.
agree.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's Rishi Sunak's, I think one of his pet projects, that I think, isn't it, help to grow the.
Yeah.
So I'll have a word with him. Pass your message on. But I agree with you. I absolutely do agree with you. It's I mean, we made loads of mistakes in our business. So we grew from tiny business up to 1,000 employees in the network, but I made loads of mistakes. But the best things we did, and some of the best things we didn't do, was a result of the networking, talking to people who'd really made it similar on a similar path to us. I think that was the thing. It's easier if you get somebody in broadly the same sector as you. I think you tend to get more insight into what the do's and don'ts. So that's definitely what I advise anybody to do in terms of their business advice.
Great. It's quite tempting to invite anyone else with a question for Rishi or a comment. We should pass back to Rishi or a message for Rishi. But no, let's stay focused. So we're starting to come towards the end of our session today. We'll let Kevin and Heather go shortly. I've got a couple of bits that I'd like to share with you. Has anybody else got something they'd like to ask our guest speakers? Phil, anything else?
Go on then. It's just something actually you said, Kevin, which I do agree with. In prisons, we do a lot of work in prisons, and all our trainers are people who've run their own business, but we very rarely get a lot of funding for it. It's very hard work, and I know a lot of other people in the network do work in the criminal justice sector. Yeah, all business education in prison is run by tutors who've never run a business in their life, and they're the ones who get all the funding. So I just thought I'd just make that point. Sorry.
Well, it's incredible, isn't it? Because what I hear from businesses is they're crying out to do this kind of stuff. They want to give, but they want to go and talk in schools. There's a great project called Founders for Schools. I don't know if you've come across it, but if you're a founder of a business, you can link up with them and they'll allocate you to go and talk to a school about being a business. And they actually send you into probably year 5, 6s, primary school age, and which is quite fascinating. I've done it a couple of times. It's great, and businesses love doing it. Business people love doing it, and I bet they'd love going to prisons as well to talk to the kind of to inmates about their future opportunities and what business can bring. So I'm sure there's a way of improving that. And again, very happy to work with you. It's not just about the money, it's also about the mentoring. And as the APPG, we're very happy to work with you and see if we can get the Ministry of Justice to roll out some kind of scheme like this. Sounds fascinating.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, it's not just prisons. I mean, there is no funding for a national scheme to help people start a business. We're using EU funding that we have still for the next 18 months to deliver. After that, unless the government steps in, I'm going to have to fund it fully myself, which I can do in a couple of years' time when I've paid off a mortgage, but before then I can't. So yeah, this is what lots of enterprise agencies are facing. Some of them have income streams and are subsidizing what we do, of course. But actually, this should be a national right to have some help, not to make the silly mistakes that lots of people do make, because they just don't know what they don't know. The unknown unknowns, as you said earlier on. So, if you're going to talk to Rishi, ask him, it doesn't cost much to fund a startup program nationally. It's peanuts in current government terms.
Okay, very good point. And again, something we have to take up with Treasury and stuff. I mean, there's something got the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is going to replace the European structural funds. So perhaps that funding line might come through those, but happy to try and work on that.
At the moment, I see no sign that there's any tendency to institute a national program. And I know that there's lots of things that need to be delivered, or everything needs to be delivered locally, but there are a startup program the program itself is a national requirement. There might be slight flavors in each region, but basically it's a basic requirement of knowing the basic facts and understanding basically how a business works, which most of the people who start have no idea about.
So at the minute, Mel, just quickly, there's a lot of lobbying going on between Carol and myself in terms of this whole position. Looking at the vacuum that's going to be created with the withdrawal from ESF, ERDF, and ESIF funding. Looking at where community renewal funds being put in place and how actually that's going to work because there is a significant amount of cash there, but a very short period of time in terms of the 7 months for delivery. And then also looking at how that aligns with some of the wider thinking around LEPs and growth hubs, and also the implications with local authorities and how that's going to be brought forward. It's a massive patchwork quilt of funds at the moment without any clear direction or clear coverage in terms of a national perspective.
Yeah.
And wholeheartedly agree, we've got to look at how this is brought into the main domain of what we need to do, because Freestart startup and business growth is fundamental to the UK economy, especially with micro businesses at the moment. And one of the things we're looking at is how that's delivered from a core programme, but with, as you say, local nuances which could then be tapered alongside local authorities. So big discussion, Mel, massive discussion, as you're aware, and there's going to be a lot of things in there which we need to look at in a significant way, especially when DWP are changing things such as new enterprise allowance, because that creates displacement into other areas which isn't necessarily funded either. So a huge agenda, one which we're all passionate about because we live and breathe it on a daily basis. And yeah, it's those small businesses which we're looking at supporting, and not only that, looking at how they can take employment into different areas as well. So big agenda. Thanks for raising it, Mel, as always.
I'm always going to do that, aren't I?
And Kevin's probably getting caught up on this on a number of issues around the whole banking side of things, C-bills, bounce backs, small business loans, all of those sorts of things, and a big agenda around startup loans as well, in terms of how that's going to be allocated and where there's going to be mentoring and support in a slightly different capacity. So there's a lot being discussed. There's a lot in the vision of where this needs to get to. At the moment in time, we're all trying to rapidly look at how we can use our surpluses and our reserves to support us, knowing that at the end of 2023 there isn't going to be the RDF or ESF funds there. So yeah, live agenda, as we're well aware, Kevin.
No problem. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Kevin and Heather, we really appreciate your time this afternoon. Carol, did you want to say anything? Carol's our operations director, as many of you know, I'm sure. Just give you the chance, Carol.
Yeah, I'm just, as Amy said, thank you so much, Kevin and Heather. That's been really interesting. There's been some really great questions that have been asked, and I think, probably speaking on behalf of our members, the information that you've given back is really valuable, and also the fact that you've Evie has put the details in the chat of where contact can be made. Also, if members want to send any questions, they can actually do that through us directly as well. So either to myself or to Amy, and then we can make sure that we get everything over to either Kevin or Heather. But yeah, just to say thank you for it so much. It's been a great event. I think, as I say, I speak on behalf of all our members that are attended today. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so for the benefit of our members, if you would like to get your phone out, your diary, this is what we've got coming up next over the course of January and February. A couple of things that you might want to come along to. Particularly, I'm going to push the Better Futures event. So this is the work that Carol and I and partners across Europe have been doing on free resources for anybody that works with refugee entrepreneurs. So helping to identify those with high potential and getting them access to training materials so that they can make the best possible start of their new ventures. So that'd be a really good one if you've got refugees in your community. We'd love to see you at that, and more details will be coming out via email and social media. And then the final thing that I would love to ask is, can you get your phone, and if you're familiar with using QR codes, just scan that code quickly. And if you're not, then all you need to do is go to menti.com. You could do it on a computer as well if you'd prefer to do that. There's literally 2 questions to answer. It's a multiple choice. You hit a button. It just gives me and Carol and Alex and the NEN team some really valuable feedback about what we're offering to the network. Thank you. And that's completely anonymous, so you don't have to worry. You can be as honest as you like, and hopefully we will see you again in a couple of weeks when we're running the next one. British Business Bank, I think there's going to be 2 directors. I know I've mentioned Richard Behrman's name, but one of his colleagues, Paul Wayne from the bank, is going to be joining that webinar as well. So all the questions specific to the loans that British Business Bank offer, that's where you can get those questions answered. Cool. Carol, are we good?
We're good.
Thank you, really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Bye.
See you all.
All right.